right into a
Mm-hmm.
pine tree
Yep.
and ripped that wing clean off next to the nacelle.
I mean, clean off. It's
Clean
almost
off.
like somebody took a rough saw and just took a quick rip right down the nacelle edge.
Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off.
All right, we're back. Episode 32, Testing Designs and Mustangs. So Joe and I are going to talk a little bit about our usual stuff, where what we built, what we flew, go through some things with our listeners and our great community, and then we're going to get into our plane history. This week it's going to be the P-51 Mustang, and then we're going to talk about what it means to get your ideas tested. How do you get your design that we talked about last time ready for flight? How do you verify it's ready? Okay. So without further ado, why don't we start talking about what we did in the past couple weeks?
All right. Well, I've say it was just a bad day all around.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, they happen in the hobby.
Yeah, and it's compounded because, and I won't get too deep into it, but I hesitate to talk about it, but, in taking everything into account, it's important to recognize that, the hobby is not an isolated thing. Like, it's part of our lives, but there are other things going on in our lives too that also carry over into. So, my wife had a pretty rough day, and I feed heavily off of her emotional state at times. And so that kind of came into me as well. And then, I want to talk about the Sea Duck in a minute, but, the outing with that didn't go so well. So, do
you remember, before we go too far with the Sea Duck, where were you when we talked about it last? You were just putting together the wing, I think, right?
I don't remember. No, I think when we last recorded, I hadn't even unboxed it yet.
Okay. But I think you'd mentioned you were looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be on your workbench, I think.
Yeah,
okay, so go ahead.
If I had unboxed it, I had only just started gluing pieces of the wing together. So that was a spoiler, I suppose. The Sea Duck is built.
What? Wait, in less than 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, yes.
You went from closed kit to built plane.
Near enough, yeah. And actually had some paint on it. Ordered in 3-blade props for it so it looked the part. And ordered in 2 CPAC motors for it so it had the power to do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, man.
And so I'll have some pictures on that I can upload with this episode. And they'll be on the website as well. But the build really wasn't bad. I really enjoyed the build on this one. Granted,
what did you expect? Wait, before you started, what were you thinking?
I don't know. Honestly, I guess I probably expected a lot more slot and hole building style with it. I just expected a lot more.
Yeah,
really just
the
like
tab and slot.
Yeah, and
mechanical connection kind of deal.
I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily rolled in with any huge preconceptions other than I know this is going to be a water bird, so I got to be mindful how I'm putting it together, that it stays watertight so that it'll float when I'm done. And so I was able to spend a Friday night, almost the entirety of a Saturday, all the rest of a Sunday afternoon, and then a few hours sprinkled on a couple evenings throughout the following week to get the duck built. And originally I said I was trying to take it down to fly with a gentleman that I work with. And fortunately it ended up being that he was going to be busy, so we weren't going to get time to link up and fly, which meant that I had time to actually paint the duck because it hadn't been painted by that point. And then I bought a can of the yellow that I wanted to use and a can of the red that I wanted to use, and thinking one can of spray paint was going to be enough for my primary color, and it was not. That is a lot of bird to paint.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of bird. Well, you have to essentially double the fuselage, and it's a very big wing.
Yeah.
Plus, there's an actual fuselage.
Yeah. So
it's a lot.
I managed to paint the bottom of the sea duck, and some of the side bits. Say the side of the nacelles and such. But really, I need another can. And apparently, who knew there's a spray paint shortage going on right now?
What?
Did you know about it?
I didn't know that. Other than until you told me today.
Okay.
When we talked this afternoon just about things, I had no idea, man. I mean, straight out, no clue.
Yeah, apparently, and I didn't know about it except I went to Lowe's looking for another can the other day, and they didn't have it. And the lady that was helping me look for the spray paint, apparently weather or something out west really damaged a spray paint manufacturing plant, and it has impacted. As far as I can tell, it impacted both like Rust-Oleum and Krylon. Krylon being the brand that I was buying. So, there was one can of this stuff. And on top of that, apparently this Bahadan gold yellow, some weird yellow, is like the top selling color on that rack right now. I'm just like, what? So even if they had a supply,
oh man.
Apparently it sells, so I'm just flabbergasted by that. Yeah, I mean it is. It's just kind of like a dirty gold color, but people love it. Apparently, I wanted it for an aged look on the duck, but the plan was to fully paint it, put red on areas, and then I've got a can of clear gloss enamel that'll go on it, basically spray poly. To lacquer it up and get it shiny and smooth. But now I learned a lot doing the duck because I finally got out my servo wire kit and had to make servo extensions.
Okay. What'd you learn there?
That
it's a little bit more of a trick to it.
Yeah. I was going to try to come up with something clever, but no. It,
sorry. I should have let you go.
I was pausing too long. I learned that it's both easier and more difficult than you expect it to be. I had watched some videos. It was like, what in the world?
No, but I know what you're talking about because I remember feeling the same way when I got done getting to it.
So I had watched a video that was like, hey, you pull the wires apart and then you strip the plastic off some of it, and you're going to crimp your wire on, and so I had ordered in 22 gauge servo wire. I think it's
the traditional stuff that's on the 9-gram servos.
Yeah, well, it's bigger what's on the 9 grams. I've got. It's nicely larger because that was what I was running into was basically the back of the connector, and you're crimping these little pins on that kind of wrap around the end of the wire braids, and then it goes into your plastic connector that is like your little servo connector.
Yeah, it's the JST plastic block.
Yeah. So that
the Futaba block. Yeah.
Those when you crimp those on. The video I had watched talked about the very back of the connector had like these two just little prongs. Yeah, that were going to kind of support the back of the wire, grab onto the back of the wire. And it made it sound like that was supposed to wrap around the rubber plastic insulation that wraps around the wire. And so I did that, but I could not get I could not get the wire to then go into the plastic connector after I crimped it, because the wire gauge was too big to also be like part of that crimped connector and then be shoving in there. And I crimped and cut off and crimped and cut off and crimped and cut off. It just, I was
went through 6 inches of wire trying to
beside
get
myself trying to get this thing on.
Yeah, well, if it helps, I went through about 8 inches.
Yeah.
To learn mine, so you're a fast learner.
Well, I had reached, so at this point I was like, something's not right. Like, I compared it to the servo wires on the other servo. I was like, this is huge compared to those wires. So I kind of tried to do some Googling, reached out into Discord, and was explaining the issue I was having there. Some guys chimed in and tried to answer my question about what gauge wire, our 9-gram servos are. And I reached out in a flight test group on Facebook, and basically I ended up ordering in some more wire that was thinner gauge. But in and amongst all that, I was kind of in Discord explaining what the issue was, that I could not, like, it was just, the insulation was fat. It wouldn't go into the connector, and it was in the way. And one of the guys, I think it might have been Sam Hyatt, said, well, just peel the insulation back further. And at the moment, I took that as the sort of, peel it back further, that'll make it fit. And, I just kind of,
like he's saying something smart, right?
Yeah, so I kind of all right, move on. And after I had ordered the next set of wire, then when I went back, I gotta figure out how to make this work. Because otherwise I'm not going to get the duct in the air. And I peeled the insulation back further, and sure enough, when I wasn't trying to crimp the plastic as part of the connector, suddenly it all goes together just like it should.
Yeah, so thank you for the tip, community member.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Sorry we thought you were kind of funning.
No, well, I did anyway, but I'm glad that it did work out.
It did.
And then I ordered in XT, I was 16 gauge, but for the XT60 battery wires, I had to get extensions for those, but I didn't want to pay for those, so I ordered in a wire and tried to solder it up. I learned there's a difference between electrical solder and plumbing solder.
Oh.
Yes. I thought it was just the flux involved. There's a temperature issue involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
one involves an acetylene torch, and the other one is an electrical heat block.
Well, I brute forced it the last time I was soldering up some battery leads.
Oh, God.
Because remember, I've done that soldering before, and I used what I now know is plumbing solder to do it.
Oh, geez. I can't believe you got that to work.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the soldering gun gets hot. I mean, legit. But it's not the acetylene torch.
No.
Or whatever. It's the map gas or whatever it is.
So it was when I was walking over to my neighbor and asking him, hey, do you have a soldering gun? Because apparently mine can't get hot enough. And, we were talking about it. And, that's when he dropped the knowledge on me. Because I also asked him if he had some flux. And he said, well, if you're doing electrical soldering, you shouldn't need it. It'll be in your wire. We got talking. And that's when, I walked him over and showed him what I was using. He said, dude, that's plumbing solder. Like, you really need a torch for that. So fortunately he had some solder and a little soldering iron that was more convenient to use than mine. So
nice. Good. Got
those soldered up and the whole plane wired up, and we're moving along with the story now. Cause there was, one more thing in and amongst there, is things that I learned. And this is something I really want to pass on if anybody is interested in a transmitter trick for when it comes time to paint the plane. With those ailerons, the various control surfaces, you kind of bevel cut your hinge, and then where you cut your, let's say just like the aileron, you cut your aileron out, and so there's the aileron, and then there's the rest of the wing beside it where that flat cut is. So the aileron and the rest of the wing are sitting real close side by side, and when you move the aileron, there's now this, if you were to do your painting and your aileron was in place, when you then move the aileron, there's now going to be that white foam exposed, which doesn't really matter. But if you're like, I want to get everything painted so that it looks good no matter what position the plane's in and what's being moved or whatever. What I ended up doing was going into my transmitter and setting up a special function based on one of my 3-position switches. And I had it set so that, and actually what I also did was created another profile on my transmitter, one for the sea duct and one that was sea duct being painted. And that's where this function is. So this 3-position switch, when it's in the center position, the ailerons in the elevator are sitting like normal. But when I flip it either up or down, this 3-position switch, then it fully extends the ailerons and elevator in one direction, either up or down. It just fully swings them one way or the other, and I can flip the switch one way or the other and they all go the same direction. And that lets me then access the side areas of those control surfaces and to be able to spray down into the hinge and not worry about if I didn't get a good angle on it. Like, it opens those hinges up to really get in there.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. That's a big help.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. I made a video to upload it to YouTube. It was nothing fancy, just like, hey, here's what I was doing. Share that in Discord. So I'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah, please. That could be very helpful. Yeah,
just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But it's nothing special. It was just going in and reading the switch positions and setting channel overrides.
Well, you did a good job too with the video.
Well, thank you.
I thought it was to the point. It was informative and complete.
Well, for anybody who is now thinking to go watch it, I did not go into how to do it on the transmitter. Like, showing you the screen, I just say, here's what I did. So,
right. But I mean, if you've played around with the transmitter a little bit, you could at least figure it out pretty quickly.
And then working on bringing all this to a close on the sea duct. The original plan was to go flying on my dad tomorrow. I was finally going to get him out and go flying, so I was going to take the duck and kind of taxi it on the water because I got a pond nearby I can go to, and potentially maiden flight it tomorrow. Well, then you and I got talking today. I did end up going out and doing a taxi test like I wanted to, and I had my phone rubber banded to a digital camera tripod. So as you could be there, and we were in Discord together, so I could have you on video.
I saw the tripod. That was cool.
And so you were able to be there with me during the taxi test, and you got to see the duck, kind of going around on the water, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And had my Bluetooth in, so we were chatting, but a mixture of me wanting to anyway, and you reminding me that, you probably only need a little more throttle and pull back a little bit on the elevator, and it'll probably go into the air, just saying.
It was kind of a warning about how easy it is to go from water taxi to, oh God, it's airborne.
Oh, see, I took that as an encouragement.
I'm not saying it wasn't. Look, I wanted to see it.
You were just stating facts.
I was stating facts, and I was going to let that go where it wanted to go.
Yeah.
I would not have pushed it if you had like, cool, the taxi test works great. Let's see if there's any water, and you pull it back to the shores and checked it out, and it stopped there. Because I know where that pond is, it's not really the best place to fly.
We've best flown there. I had nearby, yeah. At least,
but the soccer fields were empty when we went last time, and there wasn't a lot of foot traffic. You know what I mean? But you were going at a very different time of the day. It was still like soccer season and stuff like that. So, there's people around, and it's a different animal then.
Yeah. So I want to kind of clarify on that one. There's some folks around there, walking the paths, and I'm always mindful of those. There are some teams that are out practicing and stretching on the fields that are a ways away, and I kept my plane, more over towards me. But so I wasn't flying over them. I kept it honestly, it really didn't leave much the confines of the pond.
You barely left the pond if you did.
Which was probably a lot of the problem, too.
Right, exactly. And the point being is I knew where you were flying, and I knew you'd mentioned something about there were kids in the soccer field and all that kind of stuff. And I knew because of that, your flying zone was extremely limited. Mm-hmm. And that was that wouldn't be really good for, you want to be free on a maiden flight. And we'll talk more about that later. But like you want to try to have it as ideal a condition as you can get reasonably. Mm-hmm. Which it wasn't a bad condition that you were taxiing it around, and if it had left the water like it did, it wasn't a bad time to test it. It just wasn't the best place. So let's talk about what happened after you taxied it. And left the water.
The taxiing was going great, and I should go ahead and put out there too that it just really wasn't the right day to maiden it. I just knew that tomorrow was going to be worse because there was some crossbreeds today, and I knew that there was going to be even more tomorrow because that Hurricane Ida's coming up from Louisiana. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to be catching more of that tomorrow. So I knew tomorrow probably wasn't going to be better. And so I went ahead and throttled it up and lifted it off the water. And the field, like, right beside where I was empty. Like, you had to go a ways to get to anybody. But in it wanting to keep it tight, I went ahead and rolled it and brought it back. And I just kind of wanted to put it up in the air, fly a lap, and then set it down. And so I made the first turn, had it fly back across the pond, and thought, well, okay, I could set it down, but I've got this tailwind now. And you're not supposed to land with a tailwind for for airspeed reasons and landing speed. You land into the wind. It's like, okay, I want to do this proper. I need to go down, make the final leg, turn around, and land coming into the wind. Well, the problem is on the other side of the pond, where I was going for my downwind leg, was a line of pine trees. And as I was approaching those pine trees, I was throttling back to slow down and also trying to aileron roll over so I could start pulling her through the turn. And I was slowing her down and I could not get her to roll because I was slowing down so much that I had lost a lot of the airflow over my control surfaces. And this is a heavier bird that I'm really used to. So she wasn't wanting to roll, and couple that with I was steady pulling back on the elevator, I think. Because I'm trying to replay a lot of this, but I think I was steady pulling back on the elevator, trying to keep her nose level, even as I was slowing down. Because I was slowing down because I was really coming up on these trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you didn't want to go slam into them, right? Like,
right.
If you can help it.
What ultimately slipped my mind was what I said a moment ago, and this is only a few seconds apart between the thought of I don't need to land here and I forgot about it, is I'm now in a tailwind. So even as I'm trying to slow down, I'm not going to slow down as much as I want to because I got this tailwind that's going to steady shove me into these trees. What I should have done was throttle on up and get through the turn. But I didn't. And I kept trying to go slower. Yeah. Which I had
you got differential thrust on the bird, so it would have turned that son of a gun quick.
Yeah. And so I didn't. And
man,
I throttled back until she about stalled out of the air, and I couldn't get her to turn. And finally, I just pulled the throttle and let go of the elevator, and she whacked right into a pine tree and ripped that wing clean off next to the nacelle.
I mean, clean off. It's almost like somebody took a rough saw and just took a quick rip right down the nacelle edge. Yep. And then she nosed into the ground, coming off that pine tree. It actually had a pine cone stuck in the nose of it, where it caved in. But now the nose is all caved in, and because it was a nice belly seam. Now that's reverse seamed inward, and god. Yeah, the boat front look. It looks so good. That's something you can massage out. There's room. You usually when you punch something in, like the upper seam around that upper edge busts out a little bit, and I think I saw that happen when you picked it up or whatever.
Mhm.
You should be able to get like a paint stick or some, even a pencil or something, and kind of like start poking that back out, so it'll keep its original shape. I mean, you'll have some creases, sadly.
Yeah. I just,
But I mean, it's not gonna. I mean, if you bring it back to its original shape, and the seam is regluable, that's easy enough. Um, and as long as you make sure that if there's any holes or whatever, they're kind of plugged, it will fly just like it did. I really don't think that that if you put that back to its original shape as best you can, you're not going to see a big difference from the nose dent.
Yeah, well,
and the wing.
That's going to take some work. The wing's going to be interesting because, like, again, it ripped clean off, which is great. But also now it ripped off right next to the nacelle, which is also great, a nice anchor point.
Mm-hmm.
But I just got to make sure that I get aligned right. I don't want
that's the big thing.
Like that part of my wing having a +2 degrees, +4 degrees angle of attack versus a rest. No, not dihedral. Actual angle of attack.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to mess that up. It's easier to align that because you have the whole bottom. I think the bottom's still pretty flat, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So you should be able to align that easier, or the top. One of the two, I think they go straight across.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be able to stick maybe a yardstick or something like that and keep that straight and level.
We'll see, because there ended up being
barbecue skewers are your friend there.
Yeah, and there ended up being almost not quite paint stirrers, but basically paint stirrers that came in the kit that never got referenced in the build video, never got put into a plane. So I've just got these random pieces of wood that, not that I was negligent and never put in, they were never referenced in the video. So
right.
Anyway, that's been me talking about my stuff for a while, and that was one plane. So.
Well, that's okay. That was an important plane. You went from 0 to full finished plane rolling around the water in 2 weeks, which that's quite a lot. For me
is light speed.
That's light speed. I know. And it means you got a good chance to really just dump into the hobby for a while and be happy as a little bear, just having a good time, which is awesome. I love hearing that. And we everybody who was on the forums was here in our, Discord chat was, every time we posted a picture, it was like, yeah, nice. It's looking good. You did a great job building it.
No, the community was encouraging too, because I was steady. I'm not active all the time in Discord, and I went from just, periodically popping in and saying something to just like multiple pictures a day and so I know some people were like, what in the world?
They were happy to see it. It's awesome. Well, good. I finally got to finish up. Finally. And I feel like it's been forever. It's more just that I got to a certain point, and the next step was, plug in the batteries, pull out the transmitters, test everything, get out the screwdrivers, which I didn't know where to put them, that kind of deal. Right. So when I was getting to that point, usually when I get to that point in a couple planes, I'm like, okay, it's time to just sit down and get them all done. And that's pretty much essentially what I ended up doing. I finished up the Texan. So nice. The Hangar RC Texan T6, or I guess if you're getting the Canadian livery, it'd be the Harvard. I think as we talked about a couple episodes ago. Put it together and got all the electronics in it, and it goes together smooth, and it looks really good. It just looks really good. And it's big. So it's it's I'm trying to think, about 50 inches.
That's about as big as the duck.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit less, but not by much. It's a pretty big plane. That's the wingspan. And it runs on essentially a CPAC, 8 or 10 inch prop, depending on how aggressive you want it to be. And it's, a trainer. So I got that ready. And this past weekend, I went out and flew it, or I went out and maidened it. one of the things I made a couple small mistakes, which ended up costing a success in the first maiden on that. So what I ended up not doing was going back to the build video and just double checking the CG spot. But I was like, well, it's a trainer and it's right here. You know, it's the high spot of the wing pretty much. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't wrong. But what I didn't do is when I got out to the field, I realized like the surfaces weren't aligned the way I thought they were going to be, or the way I thought they were last time I checked them. So it's like I checked them, I had everything good. And I went out to the field, plugged everything back in, and it's like, oh, the elevator's up a little higher than I thought, and looks like the rudders, you know, maybe I changed models and the trims were different. I don't even know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what. Because I do remember like setting it up on one model. I could set it up on like the sim model or something like that. And then I shifted it to a different 6-channel, essentially 4-channel model where the ailerons are in a Y connection. So, but I have another one that's got flaps, and then that kind of gets in a weird situation. I'm like, let me go with something simple. And it could be that I changed it. I wasn't thinking, let me go through and check everything, make sure it's all where it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm.
Now, real quick, if you've got all your control surfaces on their own servo and on their own servo, of course, but on their own channel. So, if, like both ailerons are on their own channels,
correct, and they're moving opposite directions like they should. So,
that
was working properly.
You can go into your transmitter, at least with the OpenTX. You can go in and set the neutral point of that servo different than its actual 0 point. It's, I guess, sort of like sub-trimming,
right?
Which I don't know a whole lot about, but basically I can go in to it and say the stick's at the center position, but what I currently want it outputting is this. And what I'm really doing is modifying like the microsecond of the pulse width pulse width modulation that's on it, which changes the position of the servo. So, like with the Corsair, my ailerons were a little out of alignment when I noticed that, or my rudder was, and so I went in and adjusted that. Now, because you were talking about
not with trim, but in a different setting, like not the little trim button, but in fact going into the transmitter and adjusting that center point.
Right, because that would be before the trim, so I wouldn't lose my full range of trim. That's it.
Right.
That is eating up the range of your servo.
And that's essentially, it is, but I guess if it started in the middle and it still had movement, that's probably all I'd need. Because it didn't need a lot. I mean, it really doesn't. That probably would help me, because what I did is I did end up losing all my trim, and I still wasn't quite center. And what I needed really was a screwdriver. So I could just go in and unscrew the servo arm and shift it a couple notches to where it fit right with the thing centered, like I thought I already had done.
Well, actually, I know you thought your servo was centered when you were setting it all up, and it wasn't center.
Maybe that's the case. I mean, it could be a couple different things. I tackled that Texan in like 3 different sittings as far as dealing with the servos. So it could be a lot of different things, sadly. And that's all builder error with that regard. And there was also, like I said, the ailerons were set a little high. And if I had a wrench to just adjust the little bend, like I always have basically almost like an extra Z bend. And based on how aggressive or lean that Z-bend is, that's my trim. So I set that proper center where the servos are centered and the trims are all where they're supposed to be in the center. If that all is pretty much level, then we're good to go. So anyway, so I let it go, and it did fly, and it actually flew pretty well in general, but I think I had a little bit of rudder going on that I always discount and think it's aileron. And the ailerons were off and the elevator was high. So when I pulled full down on the elevator to kind of level it out and bring the tail back up or whatever,
Right.
it wasn't enough. I needed a little bit more, and I was out of range. And that was probably one of my biggest things. Plus, again, the rudder, which I was doing bank and yank to correct it, not rudder elevator, which I probably should have.
Okay.
Now looking back on it, thinking like you are with the CDOC, like think back on it. I think it was rudder issue, and if I had gone to my rudder stick, I probably would have been better off. So it landed one hard enough nose landing that I have to do a little bit of repair, replace the prop. But generally speaking, the bulk, if not the entire airframe, is in great shape. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah. It's a well built machine, really. And I also want to put a catchment on the canopy. I kind of put Sam's designer, and in his pattern, he kind of leaves this oval on the top, and he kind of like cut that out, and that's where the canopy sits over top. And the canopy is like a separate foam piece. And I'm like, well, how do you get that to latch in? So I created a 2-inch wide piece of foam that I kind of set in around the center of that curve. And then I glued that to the canopy.
Okay.
And then I could pull the canopy out and it would sleeve into that oval, that elongated slot.
Okay.
But I need like a little catchment on the front of that channel, that whatever you want to call that thing, that oval shaped thing that sits in the slot. So I need like a little catchment on the front, and maybe if I had a magnet in the back. So I'll be able to go do that. That won't be a big deal. So again, I'm looking forward to this, just tooling around the sky, kind of like the old Fogey almost, or the Spitfire, or the Mustang. Like all of those are really great, easy, gentle flyers. And I could tell just by how I was responding I just didn't have enough throw to correct it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was close. It was really close to be able to at least kind of wiggle it around and get it back to the ground safely, but it just wasn't enough. So, and I also brought out a plane in the last, week? I think one of our members, is it Jesse?
Jesse.
Yeah, because he's always an instigator for me. He knows that I get excited. He was just looking at a plane that he thought was really cool looking, and it's called the Viejo, and it's a small balsa model, about 35-inch, basically flying wing. And he showed me this picture. I'm like, dude, that's a good looking plane. Like if you can get it, and it was something. It came from Europe, a builder or designer in Europe, and something along the lines of inexpensive-ish, but it's like $135. I'm like, I've got $3 of foam, says I can build it right now.
He said, I don't believe you.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. And he knows that that's going to get me started. Yeah. And I'm like, I'll show you. So the next day Actually, I don't even think it was the next day. I pulled out the foam and started doing a couple quick calculations and measurements and started cutting.
Yeah, it wasn't long. It's like 30 minutes later, you had like some basic stuff formed up. And
yeah, I had all the pieces cut out and the stuff generally formed. And then I went back after and actually put together a plan set for it and all the stuff. And with it, because it's a balsa model, one of the things that's really sleek about this model, it's kind of got a lot of tapers that come down to nice fine points. Yeah. And the wings being one of them. So what I did on that model was I tapered the inside of like a typical flight test, flat bottom, and then kind of like a curved top with a little bit of paper removed. But the back edge of both upper sides or insides of that, I used a very slight taper or actually a pretty severe taper maybe. Yeah, severe taper using the iron. So I ironed it to a fine point and it went back. It was like 2.5 inches or 2 inches from the back edge on both of those. So that when they came together, the bottom snugged perfectly against the trailing edge of the top of the wing as it folded over top. And then so that matched. And then the trailing edge of the top, that taper there, was flat and level with the bottom flat piece. And so it ends up being like a perfect airfoil shape with a dead straight, super thin trailing edge.
So where do you get your aileron from?
I just cut it just like we covered last week. I went in half the wing and I cut a quarter of the chord depth, and I just, cut like Flight Test does. Just cut and bevel.
Right, but you're saying like the top and bottom of your wing both end at the same place.
No. The bottom ends 2.5 inches or 2 inches, whatever that bevel is.
But you had it ironed in such a way that it came
that
to a
it
nice
stopped.
crisp.
Yeah. So the trailing edge was a fine point. There was the bevel, or we'll call it the taper from the iron on the top half of the wing would go in about 2 inches. And then that's where the bottom taper started. The trailing edge of the bottom of the wing. And then that tapered another 2 inches. And then that was basically the rest of the wing. And it was a real thin spar because it's very short. It's only 35 inches. It's not a giant plane. And the center looks like an elongated football, kind of, with a couple fins. So to make, it's basically the stabilizer to keep it going the same direction. And it's a tractor. Again, just pulled it together and, kind of ironed over the front. So it's kind of rounded a little bit, kind of curved out some of the front edges. And then I looked at it. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to paint what they've got there, because they did a really great fade. And if I had an airbrush, I probably would have been able to pull that off. But I don't know.
I thought you did a pretty good job.
Well, what I did was I went into Microsoft Word and I made a couple shapes and I gradient filled, one over the next to what I thought was the right yellow. And it was off, but I took the same spray paint I used on the fuse, because that's a spray paint fade, and then I just basically, where the yellow was meeting the yellow of the fuse, I just kind of did a quick fade on that corner. So it faded from the color that's the spray paint to what I was using in the print. And then that faded to the red, faded to the black at a hard edge. And then I just cut that hard edge. And then there's the white space of the wing. And then on the other thing is a complementary triangle with a black fade to yellow. And I left that kind of as it was because it's far enough away from the fuse. And then, of course, I made some decals and some graphics. Again, just typing some, word stuff, and grabbing maybe an icon here, drawing some stuff up there, and just printing them out. And then I'd glue stick the back and glued it on. And that's all I did. That's little guns, little cross guns, like a little pew pew, because instead of calling it the Viejo,
little pew pew,
little pew pew, pew pew. 2 little guns and little bullets that go along the side of the fuse. The fuse is only like 18 inches by 2.5 inches.
Yeah.
So they can't be too big. But I called it the Bandito because I figured it'd be fast and dangerous. So anyway, so I got that built in record time. I think even for me, I had to change out a servo. One of the servos I put in was from something else, and I guess one of the gears had given out, and so I could hear the motor whining, go wee, and I'm like, oh, let me pull it out.
That sound.
Yeah, so that's an awful sound. Anyway, I had to pull that out, replaced it up, and then got it ready to fly, and pretty much set it up to go. But the only thing that was the difficult part was double checking the CG. I'd done a couple calculations, I'd done a couple estimates, and it's a flying wing, so it's very touchy. A 16th of an inch makes a big difference. And then, do you have any reflex? What are you doing with it? So I put in reflex and I shouldn't have. And then I fixed the reflex and moved the battery up. So that was a double whammy on the other end. And then I think that messed up the angle of attack of the pod because it kind of crushed a little bit of the foam and the impact. Mm-hmm. And so next time I tried it, it did another kind of backflip. I did get it to go maybe a couple 100 yards, but I was afraid to just gun it and let the motor just pull the dang plane through the air.
Right.
it was tail heavy and it did like a backflip, but I was able to land it okay. You know, it just was like not terrible failures for a couple tries, but nothing that was like where I found the magic spot. And then I had one where it went up high enough and then went nose in, and I crushed the nose pretty good. So I'll have to probably rebuild the nose, but I'll give it a try. But the wings are intact, and most of the fuse is in great shape. So that's somewhat easy to fix. And the motor and stuff, then nothing burned up or anything. So I mean, those are the big things that I did this week. And I've also been working on, instead of doing the things I probably should do, which are projects that have been around for a little bit, I've been inspired by these, and I'll call it an old project that I revived from a while back, the microfighters. It's an old concept from, I think, the 30s, where they basically said, well, we want an airborne aircraft carrier. And one of the ideas they charged Boeing to come up with was, can you put Parasite microfighters? This is part of where the Goblin jet came from.
Okay.
Can you put Parasite microfighters in a Boeing 747 and launch them and retrieve them from the air?
I figure retrieving would be harder than launching.
Yeah. Because I mean, you can basically have an arm kind of dip the plane out from the bottom like a bomb,
right?
And then just let it kick on the engine and off it goes. But yeah, trying to retrieve it. They basically had like kind of an arm catching system, almost like for where they're refueling. So if you can refuel, you should be able to retrieve it. So basically the arm comes down as it's where it's like set to refuel, and it like clicks into a couple anchor points, and then it latches, and then it's able to pull it in mechanically. And then there's basically the most of the thing is basically conveyor for, think of almost like shopping carts, but instead just having these microjets stacked up like shopping carts in the top of the plane. So it's a concept that I thought was really neat, and I thought it'd be a really good challenge. And I was also thinking, as a possibly a flight test idea, where like, hey, everybody build a microfighter. I'm going to bring a jet, and we'll see what we can do to have some fun with this. But I'm not made of infinite resources. And when you start looking at like the Dollar Tree foam is 20 inches or 30 inches. That means the diameter of your 747 is either going to be, 6 inches or 9 inches, or if you double the 30 inches, you can get almost up to like 16 inches on the inside, which means you can run it on like an easy pack with a 6-inch and make it like super crazy light. Or you can do a 30-inch millimeter, and that's what I originally had designed. So like on a 30 millimeter EDF, or 50 millimeters, because those actually have a lot of punch.
Yeah, then you got to take into account shifting CG, not only in the launching of the plane, but then in the capturing of the plane. And now I don't know this to be perfectly true, but I would imagine if you were trying to somehow do a retrieval, although this is also just speaking to the real world side of this.
Oh yeah.
If you're doing a retrieval and you hang out some wires in the back, latch them onto another plane, start towing it in, like that's got to screw with your center of gravity as well.
Right. I'm not sure. I didn't go through the whole paper on. I'm sure it involved shifting fuel, like having an aft and forward pump.
That's true.
And tanks that would probably be, and plus if the conveyor system moved the planes and shifted them, the actual planes would become a moving ballast as well.
Okay, I got you.
There's a couple ways that I thought, and I've thought about that, and that definitely will be interesting if we ever get that far. So anyway, I've been working up a couple different prototypes of those 3 different sizes, and I'll see what we can do. The 30-inch, 30 millimeter did not have enough thrust. It said something about it pushing 200 grams of thrust, and it was only pushing 105. or something.
Huh.
And I did a static test. Just no engine, nothing governing it, like no intake governing or anything. And I was like, well, that sucks because I need the 200 grams. I was counting on at least 150, and it's just, it just wasn't enough. The weight ratio wasn't there. So I'm thinking the 50 millimeter will be successful, but that's going to lead to like a 15-foot plane. And the wingspan, it's going to be a 15-foot wingspan plane with a 14-foot fuse.
Got to have the monster motors at that point.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting if that's the route we go. Which I know there's a number of people who are doing a lot of builds with the 50 millimeter EDFs because they're a good power system. So anyway, so that's I'm gonna leave that there. That's what I've been working on. And you'll probably hear more about it. I still have the other projects I mentioned last time. They're still on my bench, but they just kind of hang around and poke at me every now and again saying, hey, come on, build me. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I probably talked too long and I'm sorry if I bored anybody. But much like you, Joe, really excited about the planes I brought out. Very disappointed, devastated for a little bit, about not having success with them. So I think it's part of what brought this topic on. We'll talk about the Mustang first, but then we'll talk about getting that plane from idea, and now you've got a model that looks just like you want. How do you get it so it flies? Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm not the best source of that. I don't know, but I found some tips on the internet from other people who look like they were successful. So,
well, between you and me, you're the better one. So,
yeah, I've had it. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about move on to our listener comments.
All right.
And we'll talk about the build night and then go into the history.
Okay. Well, Neil Ryan said dropped a message in our show comments channel on the Discord server. It was in reference to last episode. Said interesting podcast on the airplane design. I found this on YouTube and he linked a video. It is how to start designing RC airplanes in Fusion 360. He said, I'm sure there are other platforms you can design a plane with, but I thought I'd share. So thank you for that, Neil. If anybody's interested, we will include a link to that video in the show notes.
Yep. Yeah, it's a pretty thorough little video that covers kind of it goes into the weeds enough for you to take it to any platform.
Mm-hmm. And then now looking at that, because I hadn't watched it, and I'm sorry, Neil, that looks like it's dealing primarily with balsa. So is that more the balsa size?
That's the project he's working on, but so basically it's balsa and a skin, which could be foam board, formers, and a fuse.
Okay.
Like a skin to go around. So it could work for either. Okay.
And then Sam had reached out to us. Sam Platt, do you want to talk about that one real quick?
I could sum up. I don't have it in front of me. If you have it in front, you could read it.
No, go for it.
Okay. Well, so sorry, Sam, I'm not reading it directly, but thank you very much. He basically said that we were spot on with our last episode. That it was great that we were hitting back to the roots of what the things that are important to help noobs kind of get involved in the hobby. And he's just really happy that we kind of tuned back into some of those core concepts that he and I had talked about when we started talking to him about what we were looking for with the podcast. So thank you for reaching out, Sam. We really appreciate you tuning in every episode and listening.
And the feedback is always appreciated. So thank you, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sam.
And then as a reminder, we've got a build night coming up on September 17th. That'll be a Friday night, and that will be from 8 p.m. Eastern Time to 11 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yep. Perfect.
All right, Matt, you want to talk about Mustangs a little bit?
I do. I want to talk a little bit about it. Now, there is the P-51 Mustang is one of the most popular aircraft that Americans produced, it seems. So there is an immense amount of resources. So I encourage you, if I'm getting anything wrong, let me know. I probably am, but I hope I'm not. We're going to link a handful of these resources as we talk about it. But most importantly, go learn more past what I talk about here. So one of the things if you want to build one of these yourself, the flight test has a couple really great foam board plans, and you can go to Outer Zone. I did a quick search, and as a matter of fact, we'll put a link there for the balsa, and there's at least 20 that popped up immediately of varying sizes from 12-inch models to 70 to 90-inch models. So if you want to build a Mustang, you can't step too far without hitting one by accident.
Well, it was a popular plane.
It is, and it's popular because it's pretty much what brought the latter half of World War II to success, it seems. So while the Spitfire was an iconic plane that marked early success for the Allies, I think Mustangs kind of brought the tail end of that before the jet age.
Okay, I got you.
So the Mustang is 37 feet wide wingspan. And its length is 32 and some change. I think it's 32'4" or 6. And I'm sure it depends on the model, because oftentimes they had a slightly different length depending on what kind of fitment it was. One of the things that a lot of the sources that I saw talked about was the Mustangs were very heavily armed. They added an additional 2 50 caliber guns in the wings, so they actually had 3 in each wing.
Okay.
For a total of 6 shooting at their enemy, and they basically wanted to make sure that when they hit whatever they hit, it was done.
Yeah.
So they added the two hard points as well. So they were also used as dive bombers for various missions, as well as with the added fuel tanks. You could also do drop tanks at these hard points, and that would extend the range far enough for you to go from UK to Berlin and back again.
Okay.
And I think that range, and pardon me if I'm incorrect, but I thought the range was somewhere around 1,600 miles. 1,650 miles. There were over 15,000 built, so 15,580 according to, I think, Wikipedia. That's an awful lot of planes, and over half of those were the Model D. So P-51D, and I'll go through what the models were.
Right.
So the Model A it had the Allison engine. That's the first engine that they put in it. It was, I believe it was a V12. It was a good engine. It was popular and used in a number of other aircraft, but it didn't really have the extra, power that the Mustangs were needing to be able to succeed in air combats and be superior, right? So they then switched in the Model B to the Merlin. And the Merlin, one of the things that was great about the Merlin was the supercharger. And it basically helped them add additional altitude as well as a lot more power. So when you supercharge the air pressure in the pistons, you end up allowing the fuel that's in the pistons to have a bigger punch.
So, are these superchargers like turbos for diesel and gas? Similar concept?
Yes, I think so. So basically, it takes the engine and it compresses it.
Right. So, real quick, assuming it's following the same principle, I'll try to give a very brief synopsis on these things.
No, please.
And they can either be electrically driven or otherwise, but you've basically got a fan that runs at very high speed, and its purpose is to push in extra air into your cylinders, which would be interesting because were these engines carburetor, or were these injection at the time?
I believe they were injection. I could be wrong. I did not pay that close attention to that, and I feel like I should have.
No, it's fine. It might be a dumb question. I don't know if you can supercharge or turbo. I imagine you can't turbo with a carburetor, but
no, I
so
don't
you're
think
trying
you can.
to push extra air into your pistons, which then either will let you lean out your fuel,
right,
or again get better
compression.
Compression, better burning, because you're getting more air into your mixture, so you're not worried about being too rich. But then when you get up to altitude, which like you were talking about the altitude situation, when you get up to altitude, the air is thinner, so you can run into an issue of the same fuel mixture you were running at becomes too rich fuel wise at a higher altitude because you're not getting enough air. So the supercharger,
and it doesn't burn right. And you don't get the right compression, and you don't actually get as much speed.
Right. So, assuming it's working like a charger, or a turbo in a car, is pumping in that extra air needed to keep the combustion going.
It is, and actually, one of the things about that is it's not just it wasn't just a supercharger. It was a double supercharger.
Oh.
It was one of the new technologies that came out. They basically supercharged it and then charged it. So they charged it and then charged it again.
Good night.
So it was a double level compression to put into the engines. And so, and one of the things I believe I've linked below, I'll make sure that we do. It's a really long, very in-depth video on the differences between the P-51 Mustang and the Focke-Wulf 190 that it was up against. And it was like, because these were very closely matched aircraft. They were basically when the Germans were going to basically get rid of the bombers that were coming in, they would have to go up against the Mustangs, the Focke-Wulf. It's a German manufacturer of airplanes. They made an amazing amount of aircraft. I guess it does sound a little, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know if I'm saying it with the wrong accent, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So forgive me my mispronunciation. No, that's all right. Okay, so in that video, they do a really good job. There's like actually a demonstration video on why the supercharger works, and they basically would put like the fuel mixture in and compress like an open pistoned engine, and they would put a piston in and they would ignite it, and the piston would shoot off into a lake. And based on how far that would shoot into the lake would be showing you how much compressive force the engines had. And they went through the different kind of ways. Here's gunpowder. Here's the mixture. Here's a mixture with better octane. Here's one when we compress it. And they took a mallet and just banged the piston down, which is simulating the supercharger.
Right.
And then they lit it, and that's some went clean across the lake. And they're like, and that's why the supercharger turned the Mustang from something that might have been a little bit not quite enough airplane to being superior in most situations.
I'm going to have to watch that, because the first thing that comes to mind is, sure, you can bang it down in there, but due to rings and how rings had to be placed on pistons, like,
remember, this was a demonstration to show you the difference in...
Could have been solid rings. No, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Shut up, Joe.
It didn't get into that detail, but it was neat. That's okay. That's absolutely perfect. You know, it's and that's the thing is in this video, he's going into those kinds of weeds, right? Like he goes through that about like even like, oh, we noticed this, and there were like just the minute differences in how the minor upgrades to the planes would give it just a slight edge over the other, and it would go back and forth pretty much throughout the couple of years that they were in full service, right? And then by full service, I mean in the wartime service before jet technology. Okay, let me get back into the last couple. I'm not going to talk forever. The C type, they changed the prop. I think they added an extra blade. And then the D, they changed the propeller again. but that's pretty much that. Oh no, the D was the most popular. That was the one where they produced over 8,000 of these, the D model, and really, it was like the B type, the C type, and then the D type, and then they tried a couple other things, but and pretty much they were going to like one last one. The F type was a lightweight version, and the G, the P-51G was lightweight, but it had 4 propellers instead of 3. Trying to get a little bit
4-blade prop instead of
4-blade. I'm sorry.
3. Okay.
Yes. And then they were
wait. When did they upgrade? How many engines are on this thing?
No. Yeah, sorry. I meant 4 blades. Absolutely. And then the latest thing that they were looking at before the model was discontinued was using water-cooled engine system for lower altitude missions.
Okay.
So basically, when you're not having to escort a bomber up at 15,000 feet or 20,000 feet, you were much lower. And if that's what, when we needed to pump out a ton of planes, you don't need all the extra stuff, to have it perform highly at high altitudes.
Well, it's colder up there too, so you don't need.
There's a lot of differences, right? Like if you don't have to have a different fuel mixture, and you don't have to worry about that. If it's colder, you don't have to worry about air tanks or anything like that. When you're up higher, or when you're only staying low, right? You can get rid of some of those extra things you need for higher altitude operation. Its highest speed was about 440 miles an hour, and its ceiling was basically 42,000 feet, which is
up there.
Yeah, it's way up there. I mean, it's way up there. So we talked about the drop tanks, right? And there was a couple of things that I thought were pretty interesting, and you may not have known. Maybe you did. And if you're listening, you may be, well, duh, I know that. But I found it really interesting to me that a lot of the drop tanks were made from paper. They basically took cardboard and they shellacked it, and it would last for like 10 hours. But that's all they needed it for. Once you basically got to your mission, or once you got to an engagement, you dropped the drop tanks and fought.
Huh.
So they didn't need it for long. So they made these things out of paper.
Out of cardboard. I wonder if that really helped with the cost.
I'm sure it did. And weight too.
Yeah, that too.
As well as if you're dropping over civilian population, because that's kind of where the operations were. And that was the other thing. Apparently, the Germans wrote on their drop tanks, "This is not a bomb."
Okay.
Because they would, they're operating over top of either the territory they just won, or territory that they live in, or maybe the new territory they're about to take or trying to. They'd have these drop tanks all over the place, and people would be like, "Oh no, that's an unexploded ordnance." And they're like, "No, it's okay. This one's okay. It's just a drop tank."
Which could reflect poorly on their method of waging war if they were dropping bombs in civilian populations.
Yeah, that's a conversation for a different podcast, I think.
Yeah. Maybe one day we'll do a military history podcast. I don't know.
Ooh, yeah, maybe. A neat thing about this is that there's a hole in the side of the cockpit, and it's basically got like a little door, and it's to shoot a flare. And I think we talked about this with other aircraft. This isn't the first time I think we've heard about this. And it was basically to signal the airfields when the radios were out. And it'd be like
the first time I've heard about it.
Yeah, so they had different color flares for what kind of condition they were coming in at. Like, were they damaged? Were they in were they in good condition? Everything's good. Or, did they need some sort of assistance? Huh. And they had no radio to radio in and let people know. So they would shoot the flares out the side of this little compartment off to the, to the side of the one thing. It was just like a little hole they kind of opened up and shot a flare out of it. Okay. Had a little gun hole in it. And I think, let's see, And another, and this is really, I'm not going to get into too much more than this. Was that it was one of the earlier models of a laminar flowing wing. So the wing rivets would be puttied over and sanded smooth so that it would have a true laminar flow.
Okay. Which was helping with the efficiency of the airfoil.
Efficiency of airfoil and airspeed.
Okay.
Yep. Let's see. So, I mean, they were basically fitted. They were pitted against the Luftwaffe's Focke-Wulf. It's FockeWulf, I think. 190, called the Dora 9, and the Messerschmitt BF 109. Those are kind of like the two big planes that they were pitted against during the war.
Okay.
And in the Pacific Theater, they were against the A6M Zeros. So they were against the Japanese Zeros. And if you notice, when you look at a lot of the productions, a large quantity of Mustangs were shipped out to Australia to be part of their Air Force. And if you think about it, it makes sense when you're looking at the Pacific Theater. That's one of the allies we had out there.
Yeah, I guess they were.
You know, if I recall right, the China was an ally, but it was a tentative one, you know. Things weren't all happy, hunky-dory, but we were in the war with Britain, and Britain was in charge of Australia, I think, at the time, or they were still on good terms. And so everybody was in. And I'm sure our Australians and our listening audience are like, no, that's all wrong. So
Matthew's an idiot.
I know. Well, help us know if you want. Leave us a comment. Tell us, educate us on Australia's part in the war. Because I know it was a lot more important, I think, than American textbooks give it credit. So, yeah. So I think the biggest things, it seemed to me like the biggest things that really lent the differences between the American fighter, specifically the Mustangs, and the 190s or even the Zeros, were the conditions that these planes were built in. Right? Think Germans were building it in bunkers so that it could be hidden, literally like concrete bunkers filled over with grass so that we wouldn't know where they were building their planes.
Right.
And they're built in like awful conditions, where we're in pristine factories and kind of, you know, chugging them out because we're not under attack directly. The octane of the fuel, a lot of the supplies for the fuel, we were using a much higher, I don't know which it was. I thought it was like 108, but we were using a much higher octane fuel, and they were using basically 89 octane, which is like, you know, high-end car fuel.
Yeah, it's mid-grade car.
And they had some really, and that one video I cited does go into a great deal as to some of the creative ways that the Germans were getting a lot more power out of that fuel to make it competitive with the higher octane stuff. And then the two-stage supercharger, really that extra compression pretty much cinched a lot of the victories. I think that was kind of like the other thing that brought it out in front. So again, it's my brief talk on that. There's obviously more to it. If you want to know more, there's a couple links I have to the videos that I watched. There's a lot of people who are interviewing guys who have some of the last remaining Mustangs, and they go out and fly them. So if you want to kind of see that, look for them on YouTube. There's a number of people who are doing that kind of thing. So, and they're really neat to see. And they've got some interesting, like they'll give you a look at the dashboard and some of the operations of it. You get to actually see. It seems like it's a pretty complicated thing to start. Like it's not just, you know, turn on the battery, you know, prime the system, hit the start button, away you go. There's a lot more to it. So, yeah. Okay. So that's the P51D Mustang.
Well, thank you for that lesson.
Yeah. I hope it wasn't too boring. Now, everybody wake up. Your nap is over. I'm just kidding.
I rubbed sleep out of my eye real quick. No. So last week we talked about how to make some plans from 3 views. And as a follow-up to that, Matthew, you want to talk about how to test those designs and get them ready for flying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I recently went through a lot of this designing the Viejo, or what I'm calling the Bandito. I would love to have come on today with a great success story, but unfortunately, that is not always the case. When you're trying out a bunch, when you're trying out a bunch of things, you're that are untested or they're unknown by you. Sometimes a little bit of trial and error, it needs to happen. But for one of the ways to make sure that you have some pretty good success, we've got a couple tips. So the first one I have here is to make your mark. And what that means is make it visible in the sky. We had talked way in the beginning when we brought out our old fogies together and we were flying those. Mm-hmm. We both built old fogies. They were just these white blah. I mean, they're nondescript foam board planes. And then before I'm like, whoa, Joe, before we go, we need to at least do one thing. And it was as simple as just putting a couple stripes of tape, colored tape, or some marking on your plane on either the top or the bottom, something that you'll be able to tell that this is the top or the bottom or the left side or the right side or something to be able to help you with orientation. And for us, we were having 2 of the same kind of plane. So have it so that one is one color and obviously so, and one is a different color. Mm-hmm. And obviously so, because finding the numbers on the back of your plane is going to make it really hard to track it in the sky. So give it personality, make it yours, make it visible. One of the things I like to suggest is high contrast from the bottom. So don't worry about all fancy decals or anything like that from the underside. Make it like a 2-color pattern or a 2-color thing. Try to make it a high contrast. So think of it, if you were to look at it in black and white, what does it look like? Because when your plane gets far enough away, all the colors tend to gray out. And so you're really only going to see like a shade of light gray and a shade of dark gray or black on your plane to really tell you anything about it from the underside. And then on the top, make it bright and beautiful, because that's going to be typically lit. And you'll be able to see that from pretty far away, the colors. So you'll be able to see a stark contrast between the somewhat monocolor or high contrast bottom with a bright, colorful, interesting top, right? And that'll help with, is it, am I looking at the top of the plane or the bottom of the plane? Is it going away or is it coming towards? One of the things a lot of people recommend is putting a highly reflective kind of, what is that stuff? Like the sparkle foil. What is that stuff called? Like a foil, basically. A foil paper wrap, and do a thin strip along the front edge. Like a highly reflective duct tape, maybe. Okay. Just along the front edge. Because if it's pretty far away and it's coming at you, if it's going at you or away, it still looks like a thin line. The difference is if it's coming towards you, it's reflecting sunlight at you.
Assuming the sun's behind you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. No, it's a reflective tape, so it's grabbing it from whatever. And you're going to get some of it.
Okay.
At least as it's moving, you'll catch some of it. If it's going away from you, you won't get any.
Right.
And so that's one of the things glider pilots like to use as their trick, because they're looking at it from like thousands of feet away, and that thing's almost like a pepper speck. But they'll see the little glint, and they'll be like, "Oh, it must be coming at me." So that's another option. Get decals. That's an easy way. Get stickers. You could do what I did with the Bandito. which is basically make a couple sheets, make up something in your favorite drawing program or something really simple in like Word and print it out and just, use the glue stick from, your kid's school pack and glue it onto your plane. If you know you're going to have it on there for a while, put some tape over top of it and then it won't ever come off. Well, it won't come off until your plane's done. I've seen water slide decals, which if you want to get really, really detailed, you can go to a place like Cali Graphics where they will take scale details like the no step, the hazard symbols and all that kind of stuff. And they'll almost like for models, for like the plastic models, they'll make bigger versions for your RC plane if you want.
Huh.
They have a whole process, and a lot of people talk highly of their work. I haven't done any, but it's worth checking out if you're interested in that kind of thing. Vinyl cuts. So if you have a Cricut, you can go to the hobby store. What is that?
A Cricut?
The craft store. Yeah, it's basically a little knife cutter, and it basically takes your vinyl sheet and it cuts out whatever pattern you have. It's basically a 3D printer, but with a X-Acto knife blade.
Okay.
And it's called a Cricut. There's a couple different brands. But a lot of people have access to those. Some people have access to them through their libraries or whatever. And you can make vinyl designs. And I've used C-Fly Test they'll pull out like 2 or 3 colors and they'll kind of lay the different colors on top of each other for a different effect. So that's an option. You can use pictures too, kind of isolate the image that you want and use that in the same kind of way. Let's see. So after you've made your mark, and you have a way to be able to tell your plane, what direction your plane's going and what side you're looking at. Before you get in the air, you're definitely going to want to verify the center of gravity. And that's not just making sure that it's balanced right, because that's more a part of before you go to the field. But what you want to do is go to a CG calculator, put all the information you need. And I know this is kind of like a nitty gritty, detailed part of building a plane. But if you go to a CG calculator, and there's a bunch of them, and we're going to have a list of them in the show notes. But you go to one of those, you put in your information about the plane, the wingspan, the chord, how much it weighs, that kind of stuff. And it will give you the approximate CG that you want to have. And it's, usually like we had talked in the trainer episode, a third back from the leading edge of the wing on the mean aerodynamic chord is like a very touchy plane, but it'll still fly. And a quarter from the leading edge at the mean aerodynamic chord is typically like the beginner. And you can even go further than that. If you're testing a new plane, you want to make sure it definitely like flies. It'll give you the CG mark to put out. I'll tell you where the mean aerodynamic chord is, how far it is from the root, and I'll also tell you how far back from the leading edge. And then there's I've got an image of, and we've talked about this one before, about finding where the mean aerodynamic chord is on a wing. It's basically, you mark the center of the wing at the base, or the root of the wing, and you mark the center at the tip, and you kind of draw like a line. That's your center line of the wing. Mm-hmm. Then you take the root chord and put it in front of the tip. Basically draw like an imaginary line out that's as long as the base of your wing, the base chord of your wing, out from the tip, leading edge of the tip. Okay, so you get that point. And then on the trailing edge of the root, you add the tip chord to the back of it. And you draw a diagonal line. That'll go across the center line, go across the whole thing. And then where it crosses the center line of the wing, that is the mean aerodynamic chord of your wing. And that works for tapered wings and Hershey bar wings and whatever. And that'll tell you where your mean aerodynamic chord is. And then that's where you measure a quarter of that chord length is the front, the beginner's CG point, and the third back from the leading edge is, is going to be your that'll be your advanced flyer's center of gravity point.
Okay, because it ends up putting more airflow pressure on the control surfaces.
It allows it to be touchier. The airflow, it's closer to the balance point, so it tips quicker and easier.
Okay.
Whereas if your center of gravity is further forward, it's always in a downward declination. It's always trying to go one direction. So, like you said, it requires a little bit extra force to kind of get it to do what you want. But it means it's always going to be doing something you want, which is going forward and a little bit faster, and not doing a backward loop.
Yeah.
Which I saw a lot of. So I clearly missed this step when I did it. And then, of course, we mentioned, like, check your crap. It's something that was mentioned, and it's catchy, so we keep remembering it. But let's cover what they are. That's check your control surfaces. Basically, pull on everything, make sure everything's secure. It shouldn't really wiggle. Rips and tears, check. If it's foam or even anything else, just make sure that everything's intact. Make sure there's no rips or tears or crinkles, because these either indicate a weakness in the structure, or if it's a rip in a membrane, it can easily grow much bigger quicker. So you'll want to address those before you go out. Angles, make sure that all the angles are right. So check that your angles of your tails are in line with your wing. Check that the dihedral is even. Make sure that the horizontal stabilizer is in line with the plane and not kind of turned at an angle.
See,
definitely want
those
those
more
things.
of a suggestion than actual rule. My horizontal stabs are always.
Well,
off
that
from
just
the
means you're
wing.
going to have to trim the other way to correct for that tendency, right?
Mhm.
If you have it dead straight, you theoretically should have no issues. So again, that's just one of those things. When you look at your plane, especially after a crash, look and see what happened, right? Because you want to fix those things before you go back out again. Also, check to make sure all your power system's working, right? That your servos are not somewhere where you didn't think they like I did. And make sure that they're where you think they're supposed to be. Check that your ESC is working properly. It's not reverse throttle, or there's not some sort of wacky thing going on with that. Make sure that the motor spins up just fine. Check the propeller, make sure that there's no stress points. And that's like on a plastic propeller, you'll have a lightening of the plastic. It basically be a lighter tone, and that's indicating a stress point where there's been some deformation.
Right.
And then I think lastly, and this is it, just if you're doing a maiden, try to go in as little wind as possible.
Yeah.
If you can. Now, you can't always. And maybe you're like me and just too eager to see it in the air. And if you do, fly it with some wind. They recommend less than 5 miles an hour if you can. Always launch it into the wind, because that headwind will give you additional lift. And it'll allow you to get into the air at a slower speed, as opposed to having to go really, really, really fast. The faster you go, the more likely if something goes wrong, there'll be damage on your plane. So, and also, if you can, toss it into tall grass. If you're testing your plane, toss it on a soft surface. Play toss with a friend. Toss it onto your bed or a couch. You know what I mean? That kind of deal, if you can. Or toss it into tall grass. If you're doing the maiden, maiden it into the tall grass if you can. Because if it doesn't go well, it won't hit the hard ground. It'll hit the grass, and you will probably have a plane to retrieve.
Hopefully.
That won't need a lot of work. So, and with that, I think that was it. I mean, it's relatively short and to the point, but I hope that helps you avoid some of the pitfalls that Joe and I, mostly me, have found ourselves falling into.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that'll bring you one more step to taking an idea like the microfighters, for example, from an idea and a concept and a 3-view to a model you get to fly around in your, wherever you fly and have a great time doing it with a big smile.
And hopefully you have better luck than Matthew and I had today and in the last couple days.
Man. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what. After that, I wanted to quit the hobby. I was ready to do fire sale. Everything must go.
I said about the same thing to you today when I was walking back to the car. I was like, this is the kind of maiden that'll make you want to quit the hobby.
Yeah. And it's tough because you know what? If you take a deep breath, you just let it wash over you. Don't let it take hold. And then you really honestly look at how bad is it? And then realize it's foam. You can build another or whatever, even if it's balsa.
Yeah, but I had like 30 hours in that plane.
I know. And it's tough. But think about how much, did you enjoy the 30 hours you're doing it, or were you cursing at it?
No, I was enjoying it.
Yeah. So, I mean, think of all the dumb things you do that you don't enjoy so much. There are worse ways to spend that kind of time,
Fair.
But I'm with you because the whole point of all that time is to see it in the air and just enjoy it. So ultimately, from my experience, stick with it. You'll get there. You'll get there. I know I do. I know the Prandtl D-Wing was not a success at first.
Right.
It was not a success the second time or the third time, or probably about the fifth time. I think I had gotten it, and I did all this stuff. I did check the CG as best I could. I did most of the stuff, and
to be fair, that was a tough design to pull off.
It was. But that's the thing is, so you have this horrible heartache when things don't go like Joe and I did in the last. Yeah, Joe today and me yesterday, 2 days ago, but then you have the one like the Prandtl wing. When that left the ground and was flying and it was doing everything I was hoping it would do, not knowing it would, I was jumping up and down. I was hooting and hollering. There was nobody in the field. It didn't matter. I was hooting and hollering. I had a great old time. It was pure elation. It was amazing. That was one of the best feelings I've had doing that kind of thing. I think I remember flying the Simple Soarer, but I stupidly flew it in right when one of those rainstorms is coming. So it's gusting wind. It's awful headwind coming at me. I'm like, I have no business flying this. I'm like, well, I guess I'm slope soaring. So I flew it for 10 minutes as if it were a slope soarer. And you know what? I was really proud and pleased with myself. It was a great, the plane, I managed to bring it home. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. And I also learned a lot about what it might be to slope soar, if I like it or not. And how the plane reacts to wind and how to fly in wind. Because it's a different thing, Yeah. Little errors become big errors quick. But it's a challenge. It's a different kind of challenge. It's pretty cool. So anyway, I don't know. I'll stop there. Hopefully this will help you get your idea into the air is the point. And we would love to hear about it. So if you are building something that you're excited about, if you'd like to share with the community, join the Discord, write us an email, send us something on Facebook. I think there's a message thing on our website that you could reach out to.
Yeah,
is that still working
there's a contact us form. It seems to be working. Although good. Having spoken to Ron, he suggests maybe a different form manager that would actually let us save and come back and pull up and view it later rather than just relying on coming to our emails properly. So
that's fair.
I may be looking into a different form manager. We'll see. But that's all back end stuff.
But let us know. And I know our Discord, like I said, if you're in our Discord, I mean, our general text channel is just full of people sharing what they're building and what they're flying and ideas they might have and the trials and the tribulations, the successes, the failures, that we see about as many crushed planes as we do pristine, beautiful planes. You know, it's great. And if we haven't said it, having a community around you to support those successes and the failures and help you kind of pick up all those pieces and go like, you know what, this isn't so bad. Or I know it's bad, but you know, let's go build one that we'll have you have this one and I'll have fun. Like we were talking about with the old fogies. They're the tried and true. You pull them out, you're going to have a good time. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be doing anything crazy with them, but you're going to have a good time and you won't have to worry about it. So, all right. I guess that pretty much closes up our main topic. It brings us around to our workbench, right?
Yeah. So basically what we're going to be working on until next episode. I've got repairs to the sea duct to make. Okay. No telling how long that's going to take and how involved that's going to be. Okay. But I'll be working on that and get that done, assuming I don't screw up the fogey when I take it out flying with my dad tomorrow, because now I don't have the duck anymore. If I don't damage it, it won't be on the workbench. If I do, it'll find its way onto the workbench.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. With any luck, it'll only be minor things.
Yeah. It probably won't be too bad. That said, I am expecting some wind tomorrow, and the fogey is very susceptible to being hauled away. So we'll see. But
I'll be looking forward to the story.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm looking at having the duck need some repairs, and then I'll be back into building the 7.
Okay, cool, nice. I know you're looking forward to seeing that one come together.
Yeah,
I am too. For you, it's a good build. Nice. For me, I feel like the broken record, but how about this? I'm going to try and get every size of these microfighter planes. The 6-inch, the 9-inch, the 15-inch models, varying size and shape. See if I can get them to get a maiden and fly. One of the nice things about them, the Easy Pack, there's nothing but just 2 motors, and it's stabilized, so there's a pretty good chance of success as long as there's enough lift. Mm-hmm. The 30 millimeter, I'm gonna leave to later. I still have no confidence in the motor itself, so I'll wait until I get either a better one or I figure out what happened with the other one, the original one. And the 50 millimeter is pretty much ready to go. I found where it balanced. I did a glide test. It worked out really well. But what I'm finding is that the motor, to balance it with a battery that's big enough to let it fly for more than a minute and a half, the motor has to be awful far back, and there's no space for it. So I may have to do a little bit of redesign and rebuild work on the main piece there, and kind of go through the motions again and kind of refit it. But that one looks like it's pretty close to being done. And then I've got car plane, and the J1000 needs the same stuff it's needed last time. I kind of got sidetracked by a lot of really exciting projects. So. So sorry to those who were excited to see those planes become reality. They will. They're just they've just been nudged out of the way.
They just got backburnered by about 200 other things.
But
thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Jesse. Look, you saw the Bandito, right?
I did. It turned out really well.
Does that not at least capture your like? Ooh, I want to see this. It just looks like it'll be fast.
Yeah,
and fun, and I'm eager to see that come to life. So,
all right,
yeah.
Well, anything else, Matthew?
No, that's all I got. How about you, Joe?
Right. Well, no, I don't have anything. We're gonna work on getting out of here, guys. Right. As always, thank you for tuning in and listening. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this episode as much as Matthew and I have enjoyed having this conversation. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, aviationrcnoob@gmail.com, or Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com, or Joe at aviationrcnoob.com. Certainly feel free to ask us questions, because you never know One, we're going to answer any question we can, but you never know when you might get an episode that is your question. As was the case for Leroy, I think was the one that asked a question for the last episode, and he more or less got a two-parter out of it. So, feel free to let us ask any question you got or provide any feedback. We love hearing from you guys. Give us your thoughts or send us pictures of what you've got going on.
Yeah, we'd love to see it.
You know, we love seeing what you guys are working on, your successes and y'all's wonderful ideas. Guys, we'll see y'all next time.
All right, see you next time. Bye.
Bit of a jank end to that, but
it wasn't too bad.